The rain fell in a cold, merciless sheet, turning the manicured grass of the cemetery into a sodden mess. Ethan Vance stood beside the open grave, the cheap black suit he owned for occasions like this, soaked through and clinging to his frame like a second skin. His father, David, was gone. The thought was a simple, brutal fact, a stone in his gut that no amount of grief could dislodge. He felt hollowed out, a building with its foundation ripped away, leaving only a fragile shell that the wind threatened to tear apart. A sleek black car, impossibly glossy and out of place among the modest vehicles of his father's friends, cut through the atmosphere like a blade. It pulled up with a quiet crunch of tires on gravel, and Ethan's wife, Clara, stepped out. She was a vision of inappropriate glamour. Her dress was a sharp, tailored black that cost more than Ethan earned in a month, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. Her face, framed by perfectly styled hair, was a mask of bored impatience. "Are they done yet?" she asked, her voice a low whisper that carried no trace of sympathy. It was a sound designed for cocktail parties, not graveyards. Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at the polished mahogany casket being lowered into the dark, wet earth. His father, a man of quiet strength and calloused hands, deserved better than this. He deserved a daughter-in-law who saw him as more than a social inconvenience. Clara sighed, a theatrical puff of air. "Ethan, honestly, it's just dragging on. People are starting to look." "They're his friends," Ethan finally managed to say, his voice thick. "They're here to say goodbye." "They're a collection of mechanics and plumbers," she corrected him, her lip curling in a faint sneer. "My mother and Marcus are waiting in the car. They didn't want to get their shoes muddy." Of course they were. Diana and Marcus, his mother-in-law and brother-in-law, viewed his side of the family as something akin to a charmingly rustic but ultimately dirty roadside attraction, a place you might point at from the safety of your air-conditioned vehicle but would never dream of visiting. The short service concluded. Old Mr. Hemlock, who had worked alongside his father at the garage for 40 years, gave a simple, heartfelt eulogy about David's honesty and quiet generosity. Ethan felt a fresh wave of grief crash over him, so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. He felt Clara's manicured nails dig into his arm. "Let's go. There's no need for the dreary little reception at that sad little hall." "I have to go," Ethan insisted, pulling his arm away gently. "They're expecting me. Dad arranged it." Clara's eyes flashed with a cold fire. "He arranged it? With what money, Ethan? The pittance he had stuffed in a coffee can? We are not going to some depressing potluck with people who smell of motor oil. It's embarrassing." Her cruelty was so casual, so reflexive, that it left him breathless. She spoke of his father as if he were a failed project, a source of second-hand shame. The man who had taught Ethan how to be decent, how to work hard, how to live with integrity. "I am going," he said, his voice quiet but firm. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then a slow, condescending smile spread across her face. It was the smile she used when a waiter got her order wrong, a mixture of pity and contempt. "Fine," she said, her tone suddenly light, almost cheerful. She reached into her impossibly expensive handbag and pulled out her wallet. She plucked out 3 crisp $100 bills and pressed them into his hand. "Here," she said, loud enough for a few of his father's grieving friends to hear. "For your trouble. A little something to help with the expenses." The gesture was a calculated performance of charity designed to humiliate him completely. It was not a gift. It was a dismissal. It was a statement. "You and your kind are beneath me, and this is what you are worth." His fingers went numb around the bills. The shame was a hot flush that crawled up his neck. I'm leaving, Clara announced, turning on her heel. I have a charity luncheon to prepare for, with people who matter. Call a taxi when you're done playing the dutiful son. She walked back to the car without a backward glance, her heels leaving sharp, deep wounds in the soft ground. The car door closed with a solid, expensive thud, and the vehicle pulled away, disappearing down the rain-slicked road. Ethan stood alone, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, the $300 in his hand, feeling as heavy and as worthless as a pile of stones. He was abandoned at his own father's funeral. The hollowness inside him was now complete, a vast, echoing cavern of loss and betrayal. He let the money fall from his fingers, watching as the bills landed in a muddy puddle, the faces of dead presidents staring up at the grey, weeping sky. Later, at the small reception hall, Ethan moved through the crowd in a daze. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and shared memories. People clasped his shoulder, offering quiet condolences. It was all a blur. Just as the small gathering was winding down, a man in a slightly rumpled suit approached him. He was Arthur Sims, the local lawyer who had handled his father's meagre affairs. "Ethan," Arthur said, his voice gentle, "my deepest sympathies. Your father was a good man, a very good man." "Thank you, Arthur," Ethan mumbled. "He left something for you, specifically for you," the lawyer continued, holding out a small, plain object. It was an old wooden box, no bigger than a book, dark with age and sealed with a simple lock. It looked like something you would find in a dusty attic, forgotten and unimportant. "He was very clear in his instructions," Arthur explained. "I was to give this to you and only you after the service." Ethan took the box. It was surprisingly heavy, solid. He ran his thumb over the worn wood, feeling the grain. In a day of profound loss, this small, tangible object felt like the only real thing in the world. It was the last thing his father had touched, the last message he had sent. It was a mystery seed planted in the barren soil of his grief. The drive home was a lonely journey through a world washed in shades of grey. The rain hadn't stopped, drumming a sombre, relentless rhythm on the roof of his 10-year-old sedan. The empty passenger seat beside him was a silent accusation. He pulled into the driveway of the house he and Clara shared. It was more her house than his. He had merely paid for it. Every overtime hour, every weekend shift had been poured into the mortgage on this oversized testament to her social ambitions. The house was dark and silent. She wasn't home. Of course, she wasn't. Her charity luncheon, her friends, her glittering world, they were all more important than the man she had married, the man who was currently drowning in grief. He stepped inside, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He could almost hear the echoes of past arguments, of his own weary sighs and her sharp, demanding voice. He remembered the fight they had last Christmas. He had been working double shifts at the plant to save up for a modest vacation, maybe a week at a quiet beach. A chance to reconnect, to breathe. Then she had come home one afternoon, her eyes sparkling, holding up a shimmering designer bag. "Look what I found," she'd chirped, as if it had magically appeared. It cost $3,000. The vacation fund was gone in an instant. When he had tried to protest, his voice laced with exhaustion, she had turned on him. "Oh, don't be so dreary, Ethan. It's just money. Are you saying I don't deserve nice things? Is that it? After all I put up with?" "Put up with?" he had asked, stunned. "Yes, your family, your dreary, working-class background. My friends are all married to executives, to partners at law firms. I'm married to you. The least you can do is not complain when I buy myself something to make me feel better about it." He had retreated as he always did. Her words were like acid, and he had learned long ago that arguing only resulted in more pain. He would simply work harder. He would take on more shifts. He would make up the difference. That was his role. He was the engine. She was the beautiful, expensive carriage. He thought of the dinners with her family. Her mother, Diana, a woman whose face was pulled so tight by cosmetic procedures that her smile was a terrifying grimace, would speak of maintaining standards. Her brother Marcus, a puffed-up executive at a mid-level tech company called Apex Innovations, would boast about his latest deal, his new car, his exclusive golf club. They would talk around Ethan, and sometimes through him, about their world of acquisitions and mergers and summering in the Hamptons. Occasionally, Marcus would turn to him with a patronizing air. "So, Ethan, still tinkering with those— what is it? Industrial machines?" "I'm a senior maintenance supervisor," Ethan would say, his voice even. Right. Fascinating," Marcus would reply, before immediately turning away to discuss stock options with his mother. They saw his hard work not as a source of pride, but as a quaint, slightly embarrassing hobby. Their own wealth, Ethan suspected, was a fragile construct, a house of cards built on debt and the desperate need to project success. Marcus often talked about creative accounting and leveraging assets in a way that made Ethan deeply uncomfortable. He was shaken from his memories by the buzz of his phone. He pulled it from his pocket. It was a notification from his bank. He opened it, his heart giving a strange, painful lurch. "Joint savings account transaction alert, withdrawal, $42,781.14. New balance, $0. Every penny, every single penny he had worked for, saved, scraped together. The emergency fund, the money for the property taxes, the buffer that kept them from financial ruin. It was all gone. Before he could even process the shock, another message appeared on his screen. It was a text from Clara. "I'm done, Ethan. I'm done carrying dead weight and pretending this is a partnership. I've taken what I'm owed for the years I've wasted. Consider it my severance package. My lawyer will be in touch about the house. Don't try to contact me." He read the message once, then again. The words were cold, clinical, and utterly final. She had waited until the day of his father's funeral. She had waited until he was at his most vulnerable, his most broken, and she had delivered the killing blow. He didn't feel anger. He didn't feel rage. What he felt was a profound, terrifying emptiness. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that it transcended emotion. It was as if she had reached into his chest and surgically removed his heart, leaving nothing behind. He sank onto the floor of the cold, dark foyer, the phone slipping from his grasp. He was alone. His father was gone. His wife had abandoned him. His life savings had been stolen. He had nothing. His gaze fell upon the small wooden box sitting on the entryway table, the last gift from his father. It was the only thing in his entire world that wasn't tainted by Clara, by her ambition, by her cruelty. Slowly, mechanically, he got to his feet and picked it up. He ran his fingers along the seams, searching for a way in. Taped to the underside, almost invisible against the dark wood, was a tiny, old-fashioned key. A skeleton key, tarnished with age. His fingers fumbled with it, but he managed to slide it from the tape. He turned the box over and found the keyhole. With a click that sounded deafeningly loud in the silent house, the lock turned. He lifted the lid. He had expected old photos or maybe a sentimental trinket. But the box was nearly empty. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, ornate brass key. It was heavy, intricately designed, and attached to it was a simple, stiff business card. The card was embossed with elegant, severe lettering, Thompson and Sterling, LLP. Below the name was an address in the heart of the city's financial district and nothing more. No phone number, no person's name, just a place. Ethan stared at the key and the card. This was the path his father had laid out for him. With everything else in his life burned to the ground, it was the only path left to follow. The journey into the city felt like crossing into another dimension. Ethan drove his aging sedan, a relic from a different world, through streets lined with gleaming towers of glass and steel. These buildings were monuments to a kind of power and wealth he could barely comprehend, the world Clara had so desperately wanted to belong to. He found the address from the business card. It was the tallest, most imposing skyscraper of them all, a spear of black glass that pierced the clouds. The name Orion Tower was carved in minimalist letters above the grand entrance. Parking his car in a public garage several blocks away felt like hiding a dirty secret. He walked the rest of the way, the wooden box from his father tucked securely inside his jacket. He felt small and out of place as he passed through the revolving doors into a lobby that was more like a cathedral to commerce. The ceilings were impossibly high, the floors were polished marble that reflected the frantic energy of men and women in sharp suits talking into phones and striding with immense purpose. He approached the main security desk, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. "I'm here to see Thompson and Sterling," he said, his voice feeling thin and weak in the cavernous space. The guard, a man with a severe expression and an earpiece, looked at him with an impassive gaze. "Floor 88, you'll need to show identification." After a brief check, he was issued a temporary pass and directed to a private elevator bank. The ride up was silent and unnervingly fast, his ears popping as the city fell away beneath him. The doors opened directly into the reception area of the law firm. The contrast with the modern lobby was jarring. Here, the world was one of old money and quiet power. The walls were panelled in dark mahogany, the air smelled of leather and old books, and the silence was deep and respectful. A receptionist, an older woman with an air of serene authority, looked up from her desk. "May I help you?" I'm not sure," Ethan stammered, feeling foolish. "My father, David Vance, he left me this." He produced the ornate key. The receptionist's expression didn't change, but a flicker of understanding entered her eyes. "Ah," she said softly. "Mr. Thompson is expecting you. Please come this way." Expecting him? How could anyone be expecting him? He followed her down a long, carpeted hallway lined with oil paintings of stern-faced men. She stopped at a pair of large wooden doors and knocked once, softly. "Mr. Vance is here," she announced, and then opened the door for him. The office was vast, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a godlike view of the city below. A man stood with his back to the door, looking out the window. He was tall and wore a perfectly tailored suit. He turned slowly as Ethan entered. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and eyes as sharp and intelligent as a hawk's. This was Mr. Thompson, and he radiated an aura of absolute control. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice a deep baritone. "I am Harold Thompson. I was your father's legal counsel and his friend. Please, have a seat." Ethan sat in one of the leather chairs opposite the massive desk. It felt like sinking into history. "I've been waiting for you for a long time," Thompson said, taking his own seat. He gestured to the key Ethan was still holding. "Your father arranged this protocol decades ago. He said that if you ever came to me with that key, it meant you were ready, or that you had no other choice." "I think it's the second one," Ethan said, the words catching in his throat. Thompson nodded slowly, his gaze filled with a surprising amount of compassion. "I was so very sorry to hear about David's passing. He was a unique man, a giant who chose to walk among us as if he were ordinary. Ethan frowned. A giant? My father was a mechanic, a good one, an honest one, but he was a simple man. A slow smile touched Thompson's lips. That, Mr. Vance, was his greatest creation, the masterpiece of his life. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the polished desk. Your father was not a mechanic. That was a life he chose, a role he played. In his youth, David Vance was a prodigy of engineering and finance. He was the silent, anonymous founder and majority shareholder of the corporation whose building we are currently sitting in. The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, disconnected from reality. Orion Holdings? Ethan asked. The name from the building's entrance, feeling alien on his tongue. The very same, Thompson confirmed. A global conglomerate with controlling interests in technology, logistics, banking, and real estate. Your father built it from the ground up with a few partners, but he was always the visionary, the true owner. He put a management structure in place 40 years ago and walked away from the day-to-day operations. He wanted a different life, a real life. Ethan just stared, his mind reeling. He thought of his father's calloused hands, the smell of grease on his work clothes, the simple, rented house he lived in. It was impossible. As if reading his thoughts, Thompson slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the desk. Proof is always best. Ethan opened it. Inside were copies of the original incorporation documents for Orion Holdings. There was his father's signature, David Vance. There were old, black-and-white photos of a young, confident David standing beside other men whose faces were now famous, titans of industry he'd only ever seen on the covers of magazines. It was all true. His entire understanding of his father, of his own life, was a lie. A beautiful, protective lie. Why? Ethan whispered. Why would he hide all this? To protect you, Thompson said simply. He'd seen what immense wealth does to people, how it can poison families and corrupt souls. He wanted you to grow up grounded. He wanted you to learn the value of $1 because you had to earn it. He wanted to see what kind of man you would become without the weight of a fortune shaping you. The lawyer let that sink in for a moment before pushing another, slimmer folder toward him. And now, according to the unalterable terms of his trust, everything he built passes to you. Ethan opened the second folder. It was a summary of assets. The numbers were incomprehensible, a string of zeros that seemed to stretch on forever. He saw stock portfolios, real estate holdings on multiple continents, private equity funds. At the bottom of the page was a final consolidated figure. Net worth, $91 billion. The air left his lungs in a rush. He felt light-headed, the world tilting on its axis. He thought of Clara stealing $42,000, thinking she had gutted him, that she had taken everything. She had stolen a bucket of water from a man who had just inherited the ocean. A bitter, hysterical laugh escaped his lips. It was a raw, broken sound. Thompson waited patiently for the shock to subside. It is a staggering responsibility, I know. Ethan finally managed to compose himself, a new, cold clarity beginning to form in his mind. He thought of Clara, her family, their smug condescension. He thought of Marcus, bragging about his job at Apex Innovations. There's a company, Ethan said, his voice strangely steady. Apex Innovations. My brother-in-law, Marcus Thorne, is an executive there. Thompson's face, which had been a mask of professional calm, showed the barest flicker of recognition. He swiveled in his chair and typed something into his computer. He read the screen for a moment, his brow furrowed. He turned back to Ethan, his expression now grim. Mr. Vance, he said, his voice low and serious. Apex Innovations is not just some company that Orion Holdings has a stake in. According to our records, Orion Holdings acquired Apex 7 years ago in a leveraged buyout. Thompson paused, letting the weight of his next words land with the force of a physical blow. It is a wholly owned and, frankly, consistently underperforming subsidiary of the conglomerate that you now control. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a devastating snap. The job Marcus was so proud of, the source of the family's status, their wealth, their arrogance, it all existed because of his father's hidden empire. Their entire world was a small, insignificant province within the kingdom he had just inherited. They were parasites feeding off the host they despised. A profound, chilling silence filled the magnificent office. Ethan sat perfectly still, the portfolio open in his lap. The initial shock of the revelation, the dizzying scale of the fortune, was beginning to recede. In its place, something else was rising. It was a cold, hard resolve, forged in the crucible of his grief and betrayal. The image of Clara at the funeral, pressing those bills into his hand, the words of her final text message, the smug, condescending faces of her family at their dinner table. All these moments coalesced into a single, sharp point of focus. He had been a victim for years. He had endured their scorn, their insults, their casual cruelty. He had absorbed it all, turning the other cheek, working harder, hoping his quiet dedication would one day be enough. He was wrong. For people like Clara and her family, it would never be enough. Theirs was a world built on a hierarchy of contempt, and he would always be at the bottom. But not anymore. The power that now rested in his hands was absolute. It was a force of nature, capable of creation and destruction on a scale he could barely imagine. And the people who had spent years making him feel worthless were, in a twist of cruel irony, completely at his mercy. He looked up from the documents, his eyes meeting Mr. Thompson's steady gaze. The lawyer was watching him, waiting. He had seen this moment before, the instant when a man realizes the true extent of his power. "What can we do?" Ethan asked. His voice was different now. The thin, reedy tone of the victim was gone, replaced by a low, quiet authority that seemed to echo the power of the city skyline behind him. Thompson leaned back in his chair, a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of approval. "The question, Mr. Vance, is what do you want to do? You are in control. You can do anything. You could dissolve the company tomorrow. You could fire the entire board. You could sell it for parts." Ethan considered this. A part of him, the old Ethan, wanted to just walk away, to take this incredible fortune and disappear, to live a quiet life far from the memory of his pain. But another part, a new and colder part, knew that wasn't justice. That was abdication. "My father," Ethan began, thinking aloud. "He let them be. He owned the company Marcus worked for, and he let him keep his job, his lifestyle. Your father had a deep-seated and, in my opinion, sometimes excessive, belief in non-interference," Thompson said. "He set things in motion and preferred to watch them play out. He also had a soft spot for lost causes. He knew the thorns were unimpressive, but he didn't see them as malicious. He was, perhaps, mistaken." Thompson opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out another file, this one thinner. "In fact," the lawyer continued, his voice dropping, "my internal risk assessment team has flagged Apex Innovations multiple times over the last few years. There have been irregularities, suspicions of mismanagement and potential malfeasance. We have suggested a full audit on 3 separate occasions." "What happened?" Ethan asked. "Your father vetoed it each time," Thompson said with a sigh. "He said, and I quote, 'Let the boy have his little kingdom.' He was sentimental about family, even a dysfunctional one acquired by marriage. You, Mr. Vance, are under no such obligation. That was it. That was the final push. His father's misplaced sentimentality had enabled their arrogance. His own passivity had fed their contempt. The cycle had to end.
"I want to know the truth," Ethan said, his voice hard as steel. "I want to know exactly what they have been doing in their little kingdom." A sharp, predatory glint appeared in Thompson's eyes. This was the language he understood. This was the beginning of a campaign. "An excellent decision," the lawyer said, his tone all business. "We will formulate a plan. It will be surgical, legal, and utterly devastating. We will use the system, the very system they thought they were masters of, to dismantle them." For the next hour, they sat at the massive desk, mapping out the strategy. It was like a military operation. Step 1, a no-notice, full-scope forensic audit of Apex Innovations. Thompson explained he would dispatch Orion's most feared and ruthless team of auditors. "They are known as the surgeons," he said with a grim smile, "because they cut out cancer." Step 2, a simultaneous review of all financial instruments connected to the Thorne family.
Orion Holdings had a significant banking division. It turned out that the mortgage on Clara's family mansion, the loans for their luxury cars, and Marcus's extensive lines of credit were all held, through a series of intermediaries, by banks that were ultimately owned by Orion, by him. Step 3, an anonymous but highly detailed tip to the financial regulatory authorities. Thompson would draft it himself, pointing the government investigators directly at the fraudulent activities the audit was certain to uncover. This would trigger a federal investigation, freezing their personal assets and destroying what was left of their public reputation. "They have built their lives on a foundation of debt and deception," Thompson summarized, his voice cold and precise. "We will simply kick out the support beams and watch it all come down. Their own actions will be the cause of their ruin. We are merely providing the mirror." Ethan listened, a sense of detached calm settling over him. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about balance. It was about restoring a natural order that had been perverted by their greed and his silence. "Do it," Ethan said, his voice leaving no room for doubt. Thompson slid a single document across the desk. It was a formal directive authorizing Harold Thompson as acting counsel for the new chairman to take all necessary actions regarding the subsidiary Apex Innovations. Ethan picked up a heavy gold-plated pen from the desk. He thought of his father's grease-stained hands. He thought of the $42,000 that Clara had called a severance package. He thought of being left alone at the cemetery. He signed his name. The signature was firm, clear, and powerful. It was nothing like the shaky hand that had accepted the wooden box just a day before. Thompson took the document and nodded. He swiveled in his chair and picked up his phone, pressing a single button.
"Cynthia," he said into the receiver, his voice crisp and commanding. "Execute Directive 7, full scope, the surgeons. No exceptions and no delays. And get me the head of our private banking division on my other line." Ethan watched him, this master of a world he never knew existed. The first domino had just been pushed. He could almost hear it beginning to fall, a sound that would soon become an earth-shattering roar. He leaned back in the leather chair and looked out the window at the sprawling city below. For the first time in a very long time, he felt like he could breathe. The first domino fell at exactly 10 a.m. the next morning. Marcus Thorne was in the middle of the Apex Innovations boardroom, pacing in front of a whiteboard covered in buzzwords. He was delivering a presentation on synergistic leveraging of forward-facing assets, a string of meaningless jargon designed to impress the regional vice presidents. He was at the peak of his self-perceived power, basking in the glow of his own voice.
That's when the boardroom doors opened. It wasn't a quiet entrance. The doors were pushed open firmly, and 4 men and 1 woman in severe dark suits walked in. They moved with a chilling, unified purpose. Their leader, a man with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, strode directly to the head of the table. "Marcus Thorne?" the man asked. It wasn't a question, it was a confirmation. Marcus, thrown off his rhythm, sputtered, "Yes? We're in the middle of a meeting here. Who are you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he placed a thin briefcase on the table and opened it. He produced a single, letter-headed document and slid it in front of Marcus. "By the authority of the Board of Directors of Orion Holdings," the man said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "we are initiating an immediate, full-scope forensic audit of this company. All operations will cease.
All digital and physical records are now the property of this audit team. Your network access has been revoked. You will be escorted from the premises pending the results of our investigation." The blood drained from Marcus's face. "Orion Holdings? What are you talking about? This is a mistake." "We do not make mistakes," the man replied, his voice as cold as a morgue slab. 2 other members of his team were already connecting laptops to the company's servers, while the others stood by the door, blocking any exit. They were the surgeons, and the operation had begun. The cascade effect was immediate and brutal. At a high-end spa across town, Clara was preparing for a seaweed wrap and a hot stone massage, a little treat to celebrate her newfound freedom. She handed her platinum credit card to the receptionist. A moment later, the receptionist returned, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and disdain. "I'm sorry, madam."
"This card has been declined." "Declined?" Clara laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "That's impossible. Run it again." "I've run it 3 times, the receptionist said, her tone growing colder. "Insufficient funds." The public humiliation was a slap in the face. Clara, fuming, tried another card, and another. All were declined. Her face burned with shame as she was forced to cancel her appointment and hurry out of the spa, the whispers of the staff following her like a cloud of wasps. Meanwhile, her mother, Diana, was on the phone with the manager of her exclusive country club, trying to book a prime tea time for a golf game with a local judge's wife. "I'm very sorry, Mrs. Thorne," the manager said, his voice uncharacteristically formal and distant. "But your family's membership has been suspended, pending a review of your financial standing." "Suspended?" Diana shrieked into the phone. "On what grounds? Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yes, we do," the manager replied coolly, and the line went dead. The panicked phone calls began. Clara called Marcus, who was standing on the sidewalk outside his office, his personal effects in a cardboard box, his face a mask of disbelief. He could barely form a sentence. "They threw me out, Clara. Some corporate goons from Orion. They said Orion owns us." He stammered. Clara then called her mother, who was in a full-blown panic over the country club suspension. They screamed at each other, a frantic cacophony of confusion, blame, and rising terror. They blamed a corporate rival. They blamed a banking error. They blamed everyone and everything except the crumbling foundation of their own lives. The audit at Apex was swift and merciless. The surgeons uncovered years of rot. Marcus had been running the company like his personal piggy bank. There was rampant embezzlement, fraudulent expense reports that ran into the hundreds of thousands, and a network of shell companies he had set up to award himself lucrative, no-bid contracts. The fraud wasn't just extensive, it was amateurish and insultingly brazen. Within 48 hours, the story broke. An anonymous tip, impeccably detailed and supported by leaked internal documents, had been sent to a prominent financial news blogger. CEO of Apex Innovations, suspended amid massive fraud investigation, parent company Orion Holdings cleans house. The article named Marcus Thorne explicitly. It detailed the suspension and the shocking allegations of embezzlement. Their family name, once a source of pride and status, was now synonymous with disgrace. The social death was instantaneous. Friends they had known for years suddenly stopped answering their calls. Dinner invitations were quietly rescinded. They were unceremoniously removed from the boards of local charities. They had become toxic, social pariahs in the very world they had tried so hard to dominate. Then came the financial ruin. A formal, non-negotiable letter arrived from the bank. Due to the federal investigation now underway and the freezing of their assets, all their loans were being called in. The entire balance was due immediately. The mansion, the fleet of luxury cars, the ridiculously expensive watches, all of it had been financed with debt. A week later, a foreclosure notice was hammered onto the grand front door of their house. Repossession agents began calling at all hours of the day and night. Throughout all of this, Ethan remained a ghost. He had checked out of the city hotel and moved into a simple, clean, furnished apartment in a quiet, unassuming neighborhood. He had a new phone, a new number. He watched their world collapse from a distance, a silent observer to the controlled demolition he had ordered. He saw the news reports on a small television in his living room. He saw a picture of a haggard-looking Marcus being hounded by reporters. He saw paparazzi photos of Clara, her face pale and drawn, yelling into her phone outside her soon-to-be repossessed home. He felt nothing, no satisfaction, no pity, no anger, just a cold, quiet sense of finality. It was the necessary, logical conclusion to a story they had written themselves. He started receiving a flood of messages to his old email address, which he checked once a day out of a detached sense of curiosity. The first messages from Clara were confused and demanding. "Ethan, something terrible is happening. My family is being attacked. I need money. Wire it to my new account now." When he didn't reply, the tone shifted to abusive. "Is this you? Are you happy about this? You were always so jealous of my success. You probably put some kind of poor person curse on us. You will pay for this, you pathetic little man." He read each message, his expression unchanging. Then he methodically selected them all and pressed the delete key. They were nothing but ghosts from a life that was no longer his. He was watching the past burn away, clearing the ground for whatever came next. It took Clara a week of frantic, desperate searching to find him. She had exhausted every other option. Her friends had abandoned her. Her bank accounts were frozen, the walls of her world were closing in, and in her panicked mind, Ethan was the only person left to blame, the only one left to bleed. She showed up at his modest apartment building looking like a ghost of her former self. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her perfect hair was a mess, and her eyes were wild with desperation and lack of sleep. She pounded on his door, her fists hammering against the wood. "Ethan, I know you're in there! Open this door, you coward!" Ethan, who had been quietly reading a book, sighed. He had known this moment would come. He placed his book down, walked to the door, and opened it. He stood there calmly, a silent sentinel in the doorway. The sight of his placid, composed face seemed to inflame her rage. "There you are!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Look at you, hiding in this hovel. Are you enjoying this? Are you happy now that you've ruined my life?" She tried to push past him into the apartment, but he didn't move. He was a rock, impassive and unmovable. "My brother is facing prison," she screamed, tears of rage and self-pity streaming down her face. "We're losing our house. Everything, Ethan. Everything is gone, and you're just sitting here. You did this, didn't you? Some pathetic act of revenge because I finally left you." She railed against him, A torrent of accusations and insults. He was jealous. He was weak. He was a nobody who couldn't stand to see her succeed. She demanded money. She threatened lawsuits. She blamed him for every misfortune that had ever befallen her. Ethan just listened. He let her exhaust her fury, let her spew all the poison she had stored up inside her. He let the storm break against him until it subsided into ragged, gasping sobs. When she was finally done, her shoulders slumped in defeat. There was a long, ringing silence. Then Ethan spoke. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the air with the chilling precision of a surgeon's scalpel. "You never knew my father, Clara," he began, his tone quiet and conversational. She looked up, confused by his non-response to her tirade. "You saw a man with grease on his hands and dirt under his fingernails, and you saw weakness," he continued, his eyes holding hers. "You saw his simple house and his old car, and you felt pity and contempt. You thought he was nothing." Ethan took a small step forward, causing her to instinctively step back. "Those hands that you mocked, Clara, those hands built an empire while your family was busy building a house of cards on a foundation of debt. The garage he worked at? It was a hobby, a way to feel normal. His real work was done decades ago." Clara stared at him, a dawning horror beginning to creep into her eyes. This wasn't the Ethan she knew. This was someone else entirely. "The company your brother was so proud of, Apex Innovations," Ethan said, letting each word land like a hammer blow. "My father's conglomerate bought it 7 years ago. Your brother was my father's employee. And after my father's death, he became my employee." The color drained completely from Clara's face. She looked like she was going to be sick. "The audit?" Ethan's voice was relentless. "I ordered it. The forensic accountants who uncovered your brother's pathetic little schemes, they work for me. The bank that recalled your loans and is repossessing your house. I own that bank." He paused, letting the full, monstrous weight of the truth settle upon her. "Every door that has slammed in your face this past week was closed by my command.
Every humiliation you've suffered was a direct consequence of a decision I made in an office that overlooks the entire city." He leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a sound more terrifying than any shout. "You emptied our joint account for $42,000 while I was at my father's funeral. You thought you were so clever. You stole a handful of pennies from the man who had just inherited the entire gold mine." The truth finally hit her. Not just the intellectual understanding of it, but the full, soul-crushing, cosmic reality of her mistake. Her arrogance, her greed, her short-sighted cruelty, it had all led to this. She had thrown away a kingdom because she was too blind to see the king standing right in front of her. She didn't just cry. A sound tore from her throat, a primal wail of absolute, irretrievable loss. It was the sound of a hollow soul realizing its own profound emptiness.
She collapsed onto the floor of the hallway, her body convulsing with sobs, a pathetic, broken heap of designer clothes and shattered pride. Ethan looked down at her, and for the first time he felt a flicker of something. It wasn't pity. It was a distant, clinical disgust. She wasn't crying for him or for the pain she had caused. She was crying for the money, the status, the power she had lost. "You made your choices, Clara," he said, his voice flat and final. He stepped back into his apartment and quietly closed the door, the sound of her wretched sobbing still echoing in the hallway. He did not look back. He walked over to the window and looked out at the quiet tree-lined street below. A few moments later, a police car pulled up to the curb. 2 uniformed officers got out and entered the building. Hotel security had finally called them about the disturbance. They were moving towards the elevators, about to ascend to the floor, where Clara was still crumpled on the carpet, completely and utterly alone with the ruins of her life. The wheels of justice, once set in motion, turned with an indifferent and crushing force. Marcus Thorne's trial was short. The evidence compiled by the surgeons was so overwhelming, so meticulously detailed, that his high-priced lawyers could do little more than plead for mercy. He was found guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. The judge, citing the brazen nature of the crimes and the complete lack of remorse, sentenced him to 10 years in a federal prison. Diana Thorne, implicated in several of her son's money laundering schemes, avoided prison time but was financially obliterated. The civil forfeiture cases stripped her of every last asset. The mansion, the art, the jewelry, it was all seized. Her name was a permanent fixture in the society pages, but now, as a cautionary tale, she was forced to move into a small, state-subsidized apartment on the grim outskirts of the city, her life of imagined grandeur reduced to a bitter, lonely reality. Clara faced no criminal charges. Her crime had been one of moral, not legal, bankruptcy, but her punishment was, in its own way, just as severe. Left with nothing but the clothes on her back and a name synonymous with disgrace, she disappeared into the anonymity she had always feared. The last Ethan ever heard, through a passing comment from Mr. Thompson, was that she was working as a part-time cleaner for a commercial janitorial service. She, who had once looked down on those who worked with their hands, was now one of them, invisible and forgotten, the ultimate karmic sentence for a woman so pathologically obsessed with being seen. Ethan, meanwhile, turned his back on the world of corporate power and unimaginable wealth that Clara would have killed for. He took no pleasure in the gaudy trappings of his inheritance. The money was not a prize to be enjoyed. It was a tool to be used, a responsibility to be honored. Working closely with Mr. Thompson, he established the David Vance Foundation, endowing it with billions of dollars. Its mission was simple and clear: to fund vocational schools, technical colleges, and apprenticeship programs across the country. It was a tribute to the man his father had pretended to be, a way of honoring the dignity of the work his wife and her family had so casually despised. "We're honoring the man with grease on his hands," Ethan told Thompson one afternoon as they reviewed the Foundation's charter. "We're building something real." To run the Foundation's day-to-day programs, he needed a director. After a lengthy search, he found the perfect candidate, a brilliant, passionate woman named Sarah Jenkins. She had spent her career in the non-profit sector, fighting to create opportunities for underserved communities. She was kind, fiercely intelligent, and had a genuine warmth that seemed to light up every room she entered. She was impressed by his vision for the Foundation, by his humility and his deep respect for the working people they aimed to serve. She had no idea of the true scale of his wealth, and he never felt the need to tell her. He was just Ethan Vance, the Foundation's chairman. Their relationship grew slowly, organically, out of shared work and mutual respect. They would spend long hours planning new initiatives, their conversations filled with purpose and a quiet excitement for the future they were helping to build. He found himself drawn to her integrity, her genuine compassion, and the easy, honest way she smiled. For the first time, he was with someone who saw him, not what he could provide. A year after the collapse of the Thorne family, Ethan and Sarah stood on a stage under a bright autumn sky. They were at the grand opening of the Vance Technical Institute, the Foundation's flagship project. It was a state-of-the-art facility designed to train the next generation of skilled electricians, welders, and master mechanics. Ethan, wearing a simple, well-fitting suit, stepped up to the podium. He looked out at the crowd, eager students, proud instructors, and community leaders. He saw a sea of hopeful faces, a world away from the jaded, empty eyes of Clara's social circle. He delivered a short speech, not about money or success, but about the inherent dignity of building and fixing things. He spoke of his father, the mechanic, and the quiet pride he took in a job well done. He spoke of the value of character, of integrity, and of creating a legacy not of wealth, but of worth. As he finished, the crowd rose in a wave of heartfelt applause. He stepped back from the podium, and Sarah was there, her eyes shining. She touched his arm, a simple gesture of support and affection that meant more to him than all the billions in his name. He looked at her, then back at the crowd, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a peace his father would have recognized and approved of. True power, he had come to understand, was never about the numbers in a bank account or the height of the building you owned. It was about character. It was about what you built, not what you possessed. Arrogance, like the house the Thorns had built, was a structure with a rotten foundation, destined to collapse under its own weight. Humility, the quiet strength his father had embodied, was the bedrock upon which a life of true meaning could be constructed. Clara and her family had chased a glittering, hollow illusion and found only emptiness. Ethan, by honoring the legacy of his simple, hard-working father, had inherited the earth.